cracking of my eyes. I've shifted the position of the book for this reading, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue, and ignore my stomach grumbling, sorry. Alright, surf. Marina let the fire burn patterns into her vision as her long, thin hair created curtains to hide her face. Her 5 friends, spaced around the seaside fire pit, had all become chattier as the alcohol hit them, but drink only ever made Marina quieter and more self-conscious. She was happy to let the conversation flow over her as she tuned out the individual words. Todd pushed away from the sand where he'd been lying on his belly. His curly hair flopped around his face, reminding Marina of a shaggy dog, and she dipped her head a little farther to hide her smile. "I'm gonna catch a couple more waves." His voice was faintly slurred, but if the beer had affected his coordination, it was impossible to tell it apart from his regular ungainliness. He stumbled toward the row of surfboards propped in the sand. "Who's coming?" "Stay by the fire," said Elena, the self-appointed mother of the group. "Don't drink and drive a surfboard, boy." He cackled a laugh and turned to Marina. "You want to come? I'll teach you." She mutely shook her head, so he shrugged and began jogging towards the ocean. A second later, his best friend James also leapt out of the sand and grabbed his own surfboard. "Oi, wait up!" Elena snorted and nudged Marina with an elbow. "Todd likes you, you know. That's the 4th time he's asked you to join him today." "I don't like the ocean," Marina mumbled, hoping that would be enough to shut down the discussion. Elena looked as if she wanted to talk more, but at that moment, Laurie dropped her beer can into the fire, and the cries and laughter served as a distraction. Marina sat for a moment more, watching the flickering flames, then excused herself and rose. Sorry. She hadn't been drunk in a long time, and the alcohol was affecting her more than she'd expected. She went as far as the ocean's edge, then began walking parallel to the surf, hoping the cool wind and exercise would sober her. To her right, Todd and James were paddling down towards a swell in the waves. The shore was far enough from town that the tourists didn't often go there, and its pristine sand was littered with colorful shells. Marina bent to pick some up, a half-formed idea of turning them into a necklace hovering in the back of her mind. She'd only collected a handful when she saw something that didn't belong on the beach. Her first thought was that it was a piece of coral. It was thin and only a few inches long, but the color didn't match anything that she would have expected to find in the sand. The waves lapped at it, and as it rolled, she saw its fingernail. Marina opened her mouth to scream, but only a thin whine came out. She dropped the shells, glanced towards the fire, towards the ocean, then back down at the severed human finger drifting in the surf. Let's see. Is it closing again? The eyes are losing track, is it? Okay, then thanks for letting me know. I need to shift the book up then in that case. Okay. So it's much higher now. Hopefully it won't get in the way of the camera, because the problem is I have to have the camera right here, and then I have to have the book right here. So it's kind of a delicate thing. I'll move it up higher. Thanks for telling me. The alcohol was clogging her ability to reason, so she did the only thing she could think of. She reached forward, hesitated, then picked up the digit between 2 of her own fingers, holding it away from herself as she hurried back to the fire. The 3 who had remained there were all laughing at something Laurie had said, but Elena's smile vanished as Marina held the finger toward her. "Mar, what the hell?" "I found it," Marina said helplessly, dropping it on the sand beside the fire. "In the water." Laurie gaped at her. "And you picked it up?" "I didn't know what else to do." "Hang on." Elena had her palms pressed to her temple, her earlier intoxicated glow gone. "Calm down. We need to figure out what to do. Did you see any other body parts?" Marina's horrified glare was all the answer Elena needed. She squeezed her eyes closed and scratched at her scalp. "Okay, so Maybe this happened in an accident, or maybe it's from something worse. It's fresh. Peeta pointed towards the severed edge. Look, it's still red. It hasn't started to decay yet. It's probably from today, or maybe a few hours old. Elena's fingers were still scratching restlessly. Okay. Who has a phone? We need to call the police. I do. Peeta flipped over to dig through her bag. Great. We'll call the police, and... Her attention turned towards the water, where Todd and James were surfing. You think they're in danger? Laurie asked. Well, fingers don't just drop off, do they? Elena snapped. She stood, dusted sand off her shorts, then jogged toward the water's edge. Marina followed. She'd heard there were sharks in the area, although that they normally didn't come into the Crescent Beach. Once the idea had been suggested, it was impossible to forget. Oi! Elena screamed across the waves. Todd! James! The boys were a long way out, straddling their surfboards and facing the horizon. They didn't respond to the calls. Elena swore. Come back! Marina, feeling the first string of panic, screamed so loudly her voice cracked. Todd! They can't hear us. Elena was running her fingers through her hair again and shivering, despite the warm night. Crap, they shouldn't have gone out so late, and they're drunk. Laurie shoved between them, dragging her own surfboard towards the waves. I'll get them back. Crap, no, Laurie. Elena's objections fell on deaf ears. Laurie waded out as far as she could, then leapt onto the board and began paddling. Marina squeezed her hands together, watching her friend set a course towards the waves as Elena paced beside her. It's probably fine, Marina said, but her voice sounded faint in her own ears. Like you said, it was probably an accident or something. Peeta's still on the phone. Elena folded her arms and shifted onto her toes to watch Larry's board. Then she turned abruptly. I'll go see what they're saying. Marina stayed by the ocean's edge, her eyes glued on the three figures bobbing in and out of view on the swell. Part of her was starting to wish she'd left the finger on the shore. It had caused much panic, and probably for nothing. How's the eye looking? Alright, I'm not seeing anybody say that it's lost tracking, so that's good. Your favorite V-Tuber? That's nice, thank you. It had caused much panic and probably for nothing. She was sure there were 100 ways someone could lose a finger. It didn't have to be sharks. The two boys looked around as Laurie neared them, and all three turned their surfboards back towards the beach. Marina began to breathe properly again. It would only take them a minute to reach shore, and then there would be nothing to worry about. She twisted towards the fire pit to call out the good news, but it was vacant. Frowning, she moved cautiously towards it, trying to pick out either Elena or Peeta in the dim light. Their bags, their bottles, and the packets of chips sat where they'd been left. Even the severed finger lay near the fire, its nail picking up a glimmer of light from the flames. But her friends were gone. In their place were 5 small drops of blood quivering in the sand. Marina dashed into the ocean. She was waist deep when Todd, the nearest, reached her. Pull me up! She grabbed for his arm, begging to be led onto his board. It's the beach that's dangerous, not the water. Pull me up. And that is surf. So that was pretty spooky. Let's see. Eyes looking good. Good. All right. How does the eye work? From what I understand, I believe it is tracking off of the right or left eye. Okay. Here we go. Those who live in the woods. Tessa flipped her sleeping bag out of its holder and laid it beside Karen's. They had only a two-person tent with barely enough room for their bags. Once Fel arrived, they would be like sardines in a tin. Not that she minded. They'd been through worse on their annual long weekend camping adventures, including one trip where their tent had been blown away and they'd had to sleep outdoors for 2 nights before making it back to civilization. She poked her head out of the tent to see Karen sitting beside the fire, turning sausages on the skillet. "How are they doing?" "Just about there." Karen was leaning so close to the flame that the flickering light seemed to make her face glow. She had the excited, almost manic smile she always wore whenever they started on their hikes. Even though the car park was only 20 meters behind them, she was glad to be amongst nature again. Should be done by the time Fel gets here. Tessa checked her watch. She really should have been here by now. Unless her boss made her stay late. That guy's a jerk. Oh, he totally is. Karen opened her mouth to say something more, but fell silent when she heard what sounded like squealing tires in the distance. "You don't think that's..." The screeching stopped abruptly, but then, a moment later, she heard what sounded like breaking glass. I tried to change that discreetly. Didn't work. I need to find a way to maybe shift the music in a more, less abrupt way. Oh well. Spooky music. It's getting, spooky. Let's see. The screeching stopped abruptly, but then, a moment later, she heard what sounded like breaking glass. Karen dropped her fork and rose. They both faced towards the parking lot, which was hidden by the forest and the darkness. The two friends glanced at each other, then Karen said, "I'll go check it out. Want me to come?" "Nah." Karen grabbed the flashlight from where Tessa had left it beside the tent and switched it on. "I'll be back in a moment. Watch the sausages." Tessa poked at the splitting sausage skins as she listened to her friend march through the forest. The torch's light faded before the sound of her footsteps did. Then Karen started calling. "Fel? Fel? Fel?" The night air was cooling rapidly, and Tessa snuggled closer to the fire as she waited. The logs, not quite dry enough for a calm blaze, spat and hissed as sap was cooked out of them. Karen had fallen quiet, which Tessa assumed meant she'd either found Fel or had given up. The sounds of the woods were magnified in her friend's absence. Tessa gazed at the trees as the isolation started to bite at her. The trunks, dark and rough, stretched high above their camping ground, the leaves blocking out almost all the stars. She felt as though she had been transported to another dimension, one without other humans. She hated the idea. Karen should be back by now, shouldn't she? Tessa checked her watch. Nearly 15 minutes had passed since her friend had left. The parking lot was nowhere near far enough away for the trip to take that long. Tessa pulled the sausages, which were so overdone they were drying out, off the fire and stood. "Karen?" She half expected not to get a reply, but after a second, Karen returned her call. "Fel?" She's still looking for her then. Has something happened? "Fel! Fel! Fel!" "Karen!" Tessa yelled, projecting her voice as far as she could. "What's happening?" "Fel! Fel!" Tessa crossed her arms over her chest and waited. Karen's voice didn't resume, and she didn't reappear through the trees. Minutes ticked by. Tessa's anxiety rose with each passing second, until she couldn't stand it any longer. She grabbed the spare torch from her bag and moved into the trees. Karen was completely silent now, even when Tessa called to her. Tessa pushed through the thick bushes until she reached the open parking lot. 2 cars sat neatly at the tree's edge, Karen's and her own. A 3rd car, small and pink, sat in the center of the clearings, Fell's. Skid marks ran from behind its wheels. Tessa rounded the vehicle to look into the front seat and inhaled sharply. The windshield had been smashed. The safety glass hung together in fractured clumps, but a hole pierced it. Tessa cautiously stepped closer and angled her torch inside. Something dark stained the driver's seat. "Fell?" Karen called from the trees behind her, and Tessa jumped away from the car. She swung around, her heart hammering, and pointed her shaking torch towards the trees. She thought she saw a figure about 30 paces away. The pale skin was barely visible in the darkness. She began stumbling towards it. "Karen?" Karen said something in reply, but Tessa was too far away to hear. She began moving faster, staggering through the bush and tripping over fallen trees to reach the figure. 20 paces away, she pulled up abruptly. The person in the trees wasn't Karen or Fell. It was far too tall and lean to be either of her companions. She opened her mouth but couldn't find any words. Then the figure, without moving a muscle, said, "What is this?" It was the most surreal experience of Tessa's life. The voice was Karen's, but the body wasn't. Tessa took a step back, and the figure said, this time in Fell's voice, "Who are you? What are you doing?" She took another step backwards and bumped into something hard and cold. Tessa turned too quickly and lost her balance. She landed amongst the bracken in the wood's floor. Raising her head, she saw another of the shapes looming over her. It was taller than a human, and its skin was so pale it almost glowed in the thin patches of moonlight that reached through the trees. When Tessa caught sight of its face, a scream boiled up inside her. It had no eyes or nose. The skin stretched smoothly from its tangled hair until it reached the lips, thin and blue, that framed the mouth. Its teeth were blackened and pointed, sharp enough to tear cleanly through flesh. The figure's lips opened. "What's this?" it said, imitating Karen's voice perfectly, as more of its companions melted out of the shadows to surround Tessa. "What's this?" And that was Those Who Live in the Woods. Okay, eyes are losing tracking a bit. I think that's because that was the very bottom of the book. So I guess